Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Benelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by Coachum, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started. I think you're going to really enjoy today's conversation. I know I am. This person I've known for a long time. He's a friend, he's a colleague, and we've fortunately stayed in touch over the years. He meets the definition of servant leadership. He's worked in some of the perennial leaders in the B2B technology, enterprise software space, companies like Oracle, Monster, LogMeIn, QuickBase, Alice. And he's currently the SVP of sales at 3Play Media. Dave Phillips, my friend, welcome to the show.
Wow, didn't know who you were introducing, but it's great to see you.
Great to see you too. And happy Friday. Today is Friday. You're in or near the great city of Boston, Massachusetts. I'm out here in Park City, Utah, but the platform brings us together. Let me get right into it, Dave. You have a lot of perspective here, a lot of observations, a lot of experiences, and sometimes the scars to prove it.
And the scalp to prove
it. I'm going to leave that one alone. But there's a lot of myths in our business. What's a common myth about coaching salespeople, sales leaders that you believe is either misguided or perhaps just misunderstood?
Yeah, I think one of the things for me was that there's a personality, like that salespeople are born, not made. Personally, myself, I got into sales later in my career. I had started working in higher education and chose to make a career change. And so I didn't start it out of the gates and had to learn my way there. But I think we often think of it as that stereotypical big personality, charismatic person. And I think there's all different types of salespeople there. And I think the sales world is getting much more analytical and more thoughtful than it previously was. I think the economy requires that. I think the SaaS model requires that. And so for me, I believe sales can be taught. It can be taught to almost anyone. It's whether or not they like this as a career. And so I think that's one of the biggest myths for me.
I was talking to somebody late yesterday afternoon, just about ad hoc, like not unexpected conversation with someone that I've known for a long time. He's been a perennial top performer, salesperson, and he's in his 50s, right? So he's and he fits the definition of what we'll call old school.
Yeah,
and he was talking about the challenges of selling in this environment. And it was everything from, working for somebody who's younger than you, or just, the fact that a lot of it's via, Zoom or Zoom-like platforms versus in person, the steakhouse, the wine, the golf, whatever. When you think about the fact that sales can be taught, what is something that has been taught and has to have been taught as a result of this move more toward SaaS in our industry?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, which is when you and I started, we were selling on-prem software, okay, and we were selling it, and then we were moving on because like the SaaS version of it was the support side of it. And so I'd like to think you and I sold the true merits of our product, but an on-prem software person could sell it and then move on to the next one and then move on to the next one, where in this SaaS world, you're selling it today and then a month from now when they're using it and it wasn't as easy as you said it was going to be, or this piece of functionality wasn't ready just yet, you're reselling it and you're reselling it again. You're reselling it at renewal. And so I think that the job is harder now because customers have data. Customers can move users in and out. Customers can see, how they're using it, how many people are using it. And so I think it places a lot more responsibility on the sales side to really position your product the right way.
And so, what's the manager? What is the sales coach's responsibility in there with this evolution? And what makes their job harder as they are coaching the skills required to be successful as a sales professional?
Yeah, and so I think you're selling for the near end, the short term and the long term there, and so you're selling the right deal in terms of the size and the right deal in terms of fit, because a deal that closes now, yeah, I may retire a Q4 number and may get you to your annual number, but a year from now, if it's a large deal and it was kind of missold, it can come back to bite you in the form of churn next year. And so I think it's really focusing on, are they the right prospect? Are we positioning the right the product the right way? And are we selling them the right amount of users so that this can grow over time, as opposed to, we used to call it overhead, when I was at QuickBase, and the overhead was the amount of licenses you sold them versus the amount of that you were using. And so if there's a lot of overhead in their usage, you're getting a downgrade. And so I think it's, how do we position this right for now that can grow and scale over time? And there's a lot of analysis that goes into that.
So I mentioned the conversation I had yesterday. One of the other things that came out of that was this person lamented a little bit about, my manager these days doesn't appreciate relationships, right? And I think this person could be characterized as that stereotypical relationship salesperson. And when I hung up, I was thinking, and you're kind of reaffirming this, relationships are more important than ever in sales. And that could be between the sales manager and their employees, but in the context that I'm talking about, it's with the sales professional, the sales team, and the customer. How do you teach that? So when you talk about that nature versus nurture, and how do you teach relationships, and how do you teach the skills required to avoid that churn that could come as a result of too much overhead?
I think there's a couple things. Is like one, so part of our business is focused in the media and entertainment space, and that is a place where relationships are king, still to this day. And so I think one, there we may be hiring people who bring the quote unquote Rolodex, even though no one even knows what that is anymore, but it brings the list of contacts. But I think there's a couple things there, which is trying to start to identify how single-threaded you are in an opportunity, or how single-threaded are you in your relationships at a customer. And there are solutions now like Gong and others that will tell you in your deal, are you single-threaded? That can look and kind of connect to your contacts to say, you are single-threaded in this very large opportunity. I think there's been other times where you can say is like, you're looking for 3 levels of contacts across 3 groups in an organization, because what we've seen in a lot of cases, particularly with SaaS, is on the positive side, if someone comes into your organization, into the customer who has used you in the past, okay, we're safe and we're strong. But if someone comes in and hasn't used you and used your competitor, you're at risk. By the same token, if your champion leaves and goes somewhere else, well, you better be following that person and trying to figure out where they go to see if he or she can bring you there. And so I think in a lot of ways, it's trying to show and teach people how a champion or a catalyst within an organization can make or break you, and try to show that through the success of your deals.
So there's a lot of tools and technologies out there that'll highlight where someone might be getting stuck in their, whether it's consistently or just in this one deal, and it might be, hey, you're single threaded. The manager says, hey, you're single threaded. The coach does something different, don't they?
Yeah, well, they certainly do, and it's like, how can I help you get out and above that? And so I think one of the the feelings, or one of the things you always had to do as a leader was early in or late in a deal, late in a quarter, it was like, hey Dave, hey Matt, can you give a call to this person to try to get this deal over the line? And while you would always do it, you would always be like, this is a shot in the dark,
Well, they think you have the silver bullet, or what our friend Pat Galvin calls the magic beans.
Magic beans, yeah. And so, yeah, that if that works, it's probably because they knew you were going to do this, and they were setting this up. But I think what it's like early on, some of the things that you can do is to say, like, how can we get to this person? Let's map out the organization to say who's in this decision tree, or to create like a mutual engagement plan with the person to say, who are all the players on your side? Here are all the players on my side. What I've tried to do in some cases is I create a video introductions to say, like, hey, my name is Dave. I'm the leader here. I own both the sales and the customer success side. So my team's going to be with you, sort of, cradle to grave, so to speak. And I want to make sure you know that, and that you have this contact early on. So when I get pulled in at a certain point in time later in the process, it's not like this is a Hail Mary he's trying to throw. It's like, oh, he's been here and he's been tracking this.
Right. So it's a form of building the relationships before you need them.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. So a lot of these are like super important nuggets that you're dropping here along the way. Over time, does this fit into a framework or an approach that you use? And if so, how would you describe that?
Is it an approach? I think there's a couple things. Is like, one, you talked about it, thank you for calling me a servant leader. I think I would like to think it's called servant leadership. And it's like, how do you help your team get to their number, not your number? And I think early on in a process, early on as a sales leader, I was thinking about it the other way, which was like, how do I help these people get me to my number? And you were adding up a bunch of deals to get you to whatever you needed to do. And you weren't spreading yourself across your entire team. You didn't have a comp plan that maybe incented more people to get to their numbers than just to get to an actual number. And then it was like a pivot, and it was working for a particular person who was kind of talking about servant leadership and this notion. It really started to click for me, is that, like, I can get to the same number by making sure they're getting to their number. If they're getting to their number, they're making money. They're learning, they're developing, and they're staying at the company. And so that is what I would like to think that I do, and that's what I try to emulate. And it was a pretty specific pivot at one point in time in my career.
Well, the whole concept of Coach2Scale is designed to bring people into a community, of like-minded folks who care about developing each individual on the team, not just like, how can all you help me get to my number? And it's hard. It's really hard. And I would say the majority is still that latter, which is, as a manager, how do I get all these people on my team to help me get to my number? And I wonder, with all the tools and technologies to help sales teams, like the Gong, the advancements in CRM systems and the whole stack that about, and by the way, that Coachum is a part of. With all of that, the average performance has gone down. So the investment has gone up exponentially, but the average performance of the team has gone from something that, when you and I were first starting, was probably in the high 80s in terms of quota achievement, to 43%. So why do you think that is?
Well, I think, I've been on all sides of that. I've inherited those types of numbers, and I've probably, inadvertently created those, types of numbers. I think, but I
It's okay.
do.
It's like therapy, Dave. It's like therapy. Yeah, we're not perfect, man. We're not perfect humans.
But I think one, a lot of it is in the planning process. Okay. And like, what is the logic that you put into that planning process? And so like, are these numbers, do these numbers have the number of the correct amount of stretchiness and attainability in a number? Have you looked at it from a tops down view, as well as a bottoms up view? And have you sourced the number around the company? And so I think that's one thing. I think two, there's been some, you know, crazy things that have happened in our world that you could not have predicted. And so you have a pandemic that submarines some companies, it grows in other companies. People then think that's a net new normal. And then there's a bubble and it bottoms out. And then how do you replan for that? And so, I think some companies are thinking about it along the lines of like quarterly plans or plans for every 6 months. But so that's one. I think two, um, hiring the right people and the right number of people, and having a methodology where when you need to hire that next person. And that has been one of the hardest things. More often than not, you probably end up hiring people too early as opposed to too late. And I worked for someone on a previous board of mine who was saying is like, you should wait until sales reps are bursting at the seams with work and almost begging you to hire someone else. And that's when you should hire them, so that they feel as though that they legitimately have a chance to hit their numbers.
And that has a bunch of downstream effects when it comes to culture, when it comes to retention, certainly when it comes to productivity per rep, right? There's a lot of pressure in the business. That's a Captain Obvious statement. But from a coaching perspective, coaching sometimes it's like prospecting for a rep, right? Coaching is the most important thing that a leader does. But when times get tough, it's one of the first things that gets tossed aside. And then all of a sudden it's like, roll up the sleeves. Let's talk about the deal. Tell me again about the deal. Update me again about the same deal that I just asked you to update me on, an hour ago. What do you say to those managers who are dealing with that pressure from above, but yet know that it may be too myopic just to always be focusing on the forecast and on the deal, and maybe more, as someone recently said on the show, coach to the career, not to the quarter. And does that help people get to their number and then thus help the team and the company? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really easy to become a super rep. It's really easy to take over a deal, and by easy, I mean it's easy to insert yourself. It doesn't. I don't mean it's easy to. If it was easy to do and accomplish, everyone would do it. But I think it becomes a never-ending cycle if you become that super rep, and if you become the person who always has to get involved in an opportunity to get it over the line. Your team and you will not be able to scale. And so, and I think we should intervene to help opportunities at the right time. But we want to get deals over the line, especially some of the larger ones. But the more we insert ourselves as a super rep, the more that person's always going to look to us that way, and that you'll never scale. And so I think like nirvana as a sales leader is, you have 6 or 7 reps, and they're all able to drive opportunities. Maybe they need some help and they need some brainstorming on opportunities to kind of help shape them and scope them. And then you get involved in the most strategic. And I think what the other thing too is to try to create a culture where like feedback is welcomed. And that is like having deal reviews internally where you can pick apart a deal and that a rep doesn't feel critiqued and criticized, but that the entire team is like poking holes in the deals, because what we're trying to figure out is, where could this deal go wrong? How can we position this better? How can we price this right the first time, so that it's not going to be a never-ending negotiation? And so I think if you look at it from that point of view, you're constantly coaching, not just when someone has, lost the deal, or, you're coaching throughout the life cycle of that deal.
Yeah, yeah. We had a couple of guests on that touched on a few of those points too. Amy Appleyard talked about the importance of collaboration and bringing everyone in to help solve the problem. Bill Bagshaw talked about the importance of having an environment and a culture of psychological safety, like where you can speak up, you can be wrong, you can say the wrong thing, but it's all going toward helping everybody get better without fear of retribution or being told you're an idiot. So and all of that leads to getting everybody achieving that level of success that they want, not just the one or two people on the team, and not just the manager, his or herself. Again, which is easier said than done. How do you look at coaching someone who's maybe newer in the role versus someone who's a veteran, senior in the role? Like, so, do you see, I guess, let me ask you a direct question. Do senior reps need coaching?
I think everyone needs coaching. I think what the actual coaching needs to be is where it gets different, or where it's differentiated is sometimes that person who's been there forever, or can almost get drunk on their own success, and the way they've
success
done
is a poor teacher.
The way they've done it 3 or 4 times is going to work this time, or they've pulled some deals out in the last second, and they think they can always do that. And so I think one, really trying to figure out where is what are their blind spots that they have, and then how can you help with that? How can you help reveal that and create plans around that? I think the other side to it too is what is next for that person, and what do they want to do next? There are plenty of people out there who want to be individual contributors. That's where they get their energy from. They don't want to be leaders. But for those people who want something else, whether or not it's a vertical promotion, diagonal, is starting to craft that, and what do you need to get to that next role? As for the newer reps, is I think you have to pick 1 or 2 things initially and focus on that with that person. And when that person starts to show development on that, pick the next 2 or 3 things, so that you're not overwhelming them with their gaps, that you're building on those successes and starting to really round them out.
All right. So here's a this or that question. Maybe not the easiest one, but what would you rather have? Would you rather have the person on the team, the loud and proud? They love the fact, they can do no wrong. It's their way or the highway, and they actually produce the numbers, but they leave a trail of destruction. They contribute at some level to a greater toxicity to the culture, but they're putting up the numbers, but they're not always putting in the work. And so you don't know if they're getting lucky or not. You don't know how they're doing it, but they're putting it up. Or would you rather have the person who maybe isn't where you want them to be? They're not hitting their number yet, but they're plodding away like every day. They're grinding. They're coachable. They're learning. They're taking feedback. They're applying it. It's just happening slower, and they're not at the level of performance as the other person. If you had to pick one, what would you pick?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say in the hypothetical, because it's all about your numbers. But I would take the latter. And the word you used there that was most important to me is coachable. The things that I look for when I'm interviewing someone is are they coachable? Are they curious? And are they competitive? So to me, someone who wants to get better and is demonstrating a desire to get better is what's important to me, because that's someone who you can work with and build and develop. Someone else who's not, it's their way or the highway, and they're probably winning more because of either, like you said, good fortune and opportunity, or their territory versus something that they're actually doing.
Well, we're finding that out now, right? So this goes back to, circa 2001, 2002, when, after the bubble burst and these people who were achieving great levels of success were tanking and they were struggling, and it was hard to figure out why. And then you realize, like, oh yeah, well, they really weren't that good. They were lucky. They were at the right place at the right time. And, it was all about going forward, finding those folks who are coachable and who could create buyers in difficult markets. We went through the same thing a little bit in 2010, and we're going through that now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is like, who is coachable? Who is built for this business for the long term? And you said it's easy, and then you clarified that,
Yeah.
which is good, because I was going to call BS on
Yeah.
you. It's easy in a classroom,
Yeah.
but it's
Exactly.
not easy.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
so what do you do, Dave, when you have that person? You don't. I'm not saying you do, but what do you do when you have that person who is toxic, and they're not putting in the level of work consistently, but they are putting up the numbers? Do you keep them or do you get rid of them?
So I think as it's harder to get rid of that type of person, because there may be people who are lower than them in performance, and how are you trying to show them why their time is over versus someone else's? But I think in those cases, you need to give feedback early and often, and so I think you need to give feedback that. And I've said it to people throughout my career, is like, the worst thing I can say as a leader is "I told you so." Okay. What I would want to say is like, "Hey, we talked about it at this date, and this is what I was saying." That's not an "I told you so." That's kind of a reminder of conversations we've had. And so I do think if someone, there's a big difference based on the question you asked between someone who's highly productive and kind of going about it their own way, but when you add the toxicity into it, that is when I think the differentiator is, because that toxicity typically ends up in two places. One, your customers, feel it, and then two, the rest of the company and the org feel it. And people have used the expression about breaking glass, and it's okay if we break some glass here. And that means like we're pushing people to the limit, so to speak. But people don't really have a tolerance on the other side of that phone, or the other side of that, that sale, to have their glass broken, so to speak, and to be treated poorly, to be deceived, or to be like oversold. And so I think you do need to move on from those people.
Yeah, and look, again, that's not an easy question. I used some absolute statements when I formulated the question. It's been shared with me that if you have difficulty, or if you're too accepting of someone who's breaking way too much glass internally, you're probably not seeing the impact that it has on your team, and that other
Mm-hmm.
people are leaving. Because they don't want to deal with this jerk anyway. And the other thing is, do you have a culture that's only based on achievement of the number, or are there other elements that are important to conditions of employment in being part of that team? And the way I've seen and heard other leaders deal with these types of situations is that they have minimum committed behaviors that everybody needs to do. And there's a way that everybody needs to carry themselves. And if you don't do that, nothing else matters. It doesn't matter if you're hitting the number or not. But that takes time, that takes experience, that takes courage, and it takes a level of buy-in and trust from the other members of the team. Would you agree with that? Or?
Yeah. And sometimes you can see it, but the rest of the organization can't see it. And so the rest of the organization sometimes sees the number that person's putting up, but not the tax on the organization, and they wonder why BDRs are leaving, or the solutions consultant are leaving, or the CSMs are leaving, and it's because they're in this person's wake, and so I think being a team player is incredibly important in this sales world that we're in right now.
Yeah. And I would argue the opposite could be true too, where everyone else sees it, but you don't. You, the
Oh,
leader, do
100%.
not. The
Yes.
emperor has no
Yeah.
clothes. That type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So it kind of leads into a question, Dave. What's an important lesson you've learned along the way when it comes to coaching and developing people, leading people?
I think data always wins, in a lot of cases. And I think a lot of times, salespeople love to tell stories. Okay. And we love to talk about this one opportunity where this happened, or that one deal that happened, and we're going to do this over and over again. And for me, data wins because it provides scale or breadth of a challenge or a problem you have in an organization. The story adds context to that. And so I think, really trying to get immersed in what is the data telling us. Do we have the right data? Do we not have the right data? Data wins in terms of trying to look at conversion rates. And it's really easy to say, we have a conversion rate problem. Let's go and fix that conversion rate. But then the data through a sales funnel will tell you, do you have an early stage interest issue? Do you have a demo issue in terms of how you're positioning your product? Are you not doing the right discovery? Are you leading with too high a price point? And so to me, data will help you figure out where your coaching needs to be applied.
Sounds like you've had some experience refereeing conversations between salespeople and marketing.
Well, yeah, why? Yes, I have, Matt. I think there's two sides to that too. Is like I've been on the sales side of that conversation, and then I've been the referee. And I remember one of the times, when I was in a role and I was a CRO and I owned both the sales and the marketing, and a frustration by our sales team was brought to my attention, and I remember saying to these folks, I said, like, hey. So the issue that they were having was, of course, like many salespeople
The leads suck.
have said before, the leads suck. And I was like, okay, let's have that conversation. Let's bring, let's bring our marketing team into this. Let's give them this feedback. But I said, what I want to tell you is marketing is going to come with a lot of data. They're going to come with binders of data. And because marketers historically have a lot more data than sales does. And if you guys only come with stories, you're going to get crushed. And they're like, okay, got it. We go into the conversation. Marketing comes in with binders and binders of data, points out that it was not a quality issue. It was likely at least TBD, but we think it is a follow-up issue. And after, I remember, like, I went going to the sales leaders, and I was like, so how'd you think that go? And they were like, you were right. We got crushed on that. We didn't bring the data, and so I think that's one example of it. But I think that really, like, that's something that I took on from early in my career at Oracle.
That's funny. Yeah, data wins. Data can be very powerful. So, Dave, now you're at 3Play Media. Two-part question for the audience: what does 3Play Media do? And I guess the more important question for the group is: what do you love about working with your team at 3Play Media, doing what you do?
I think there's a couple. So 3Play Media, we're a Boston-based company. We have locations in Minneapolis and Calgary, Canada, and we are a video accessibility company. And so we provide captioning, audio description, localization services for video files. And whether or not that's in the media and entertainment space, it is in kind of corporate Fortune 500, or as well as EDU. And so providing accommodations and accessibility to make sure content is more readily available. And so that's what we do. So a lot of times if you're watching a show, an event, a sporting event, and there's captions, there's a very good chance we've provided that for you. In terms of what I love, about 3Play Media and working with my team, there's a couple things. It's like one of my criteria when I was looking for my next opportunity was working with a company that's doing good in the world. And I think if it's something that you truly believe in, you're much more emotionally attached to that. So I think that is something that I do truly love. there's like video content is so widespread, and that's a beauty, but that can also be overwhelming
Hmm.
at times. And so I think one of the things that I'm enjoying right now is trying to get our team really surgical in where we're focusing on certain parts of the market. So, like, what can we do in EDU to win best? What can we do, and what part of corporate America can we focus on that we think we have the most, winnable opportunity? And what can we do in media and entertainment? And that's a lot of testing and making mistakes, making some failures, learning how to better approach the space, learning how to leverage your network to figure out feedback before you even start to make those mistakes. And so that's what really kind of excites me and keeps me going every day.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And like, I know you've invested in yourself and your career, and you've evolved over time. Dave, how important is it for a sales professional to invest in his or herself?
I think it's highly important, because one, just because I think one of the things that we're really benefited from today, whether or not it's like podcasts like this or content, is there's so many different um, sources out there to kind of help shape and develop you. You don't have to wait for your company to decide we're going to do this methodology or we're going to do negotiation training. And so I think it's ridiculously important. And so I think when you talk about, you asked earlier about like qualities of salespeople, and I mentioned competitiveness. One of the ways that I seek competitiveness is asking, like, how do you improve yourself? Like, what was the last thing you did? What was some of the sources that you've used? Now, I guess if you have an upcoming interview with me, you're going to get some cues to some answers, some questions that might be coming your way. But I want people who are willing to invest in themselves as well as what we're going to invest in them as a company.
Excellent. And great leaders and coaches are often that way because they had the behavior modeled for them. Not sure if that was the case with you. Can you talk about a time where you were the recipient of some really impactful coaching that made a difference in your career, whether you liked hearing it or not?
Yeah, I think that listen to your podcast. I knew this. This you always ask this question. I think it's an incredible question, but it's a difficult question because there have been so many situations where people gave you incredible feedback or difficult feedback. And so I think, like, once, super early in my career, this is before I was even in sales. I was working at Boston College locally here, and I
Go
remember,
Eagles.
yeah, I remember someone gave me feedback, and it was more about, like, the equivalent. It was like how I was handling something was affecting other people. Okay, it wasn't feedback that I was expecting, and it was certainly humbling. But I think I extend that to, like, the virtual team. Okay, and how that virtual team, is dependent on your success. So I think, like, that was tremendous. That feedback I gave earlier about data always wins came from Hillary Koplow, so who we worked for
Yeah,
at Oracle
absolutely.
Direct. And I think for what I really learned, from her, was how she was always thinking about the next step of the organization. Sometimes as a leader, you can get so focused on how are we going to get to this number right now versus how are we thinking about where we need to be 12 months, 18 months, 24 months down the road. And it always felt like she was using data in that example to project or to predict where we needed to go next.
I just want to echo that shout out to Hillary. We very formative years. We were just becoming managers for the first time. I think both of us back then, and worked in Hillary Koplow McAdams' organization. And I agree. I learned so much. And one of the things I learned and took away was exactly what you said, which is the power of data. But another thing was that leaders didn't always, you didn't, they didn't always have to do things the same way. Meaning, like, her style, it was foreign to me at the time. And it wasn't always nurturing. But wow, as I progressed, and I think as you progress in your career, you take on an immense appreciation for that type of leadership, that type of coaching. And, from someone who went on to have a tremendous amount of success in this business. I haven't talked to Hillary in a long time, but I'm glad you brought that up.
So much of it was just even about preparation. Like I remember going into that first Friday morning forecast, I had like documents of where our deals were. I got taken to the cleaners on it. And then the next week I was 1,000% better and 1,000% better. And it was just like, she wasn't preaching this notion of like getting better every day, but that's the result of how she led and drove us.
So as we go down memory lane a little bit there's a lot of things that we've seen and experienced in our careers. And sometimes when you look back, you just shake your head and you laugh and you're like, wow, I can't believe that, that happened. And, some of them are funnier than others. Some of them are more instructive than others. But can you talk about something that, kind of from the old days that, really leaves you with a memory today?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and some of them are better shared over a beer. But I think like one in particular, one of the things like I kind of hold pretty dearly is like how someone presents themselves in an interview process is indicative of probably how he or she will act or behave as a salesperson. You have to think about it in terms of like they're selling the thing they should know best, which is themselves, and how they prepare for that. And we've all had people who like didn't prepare in terms of what you do. And we used to always have like kind of that list of questions you would ask, and they would probably got like an inch deep, but in terms of once the market started flipping to more behavioral questions, I think it was challenging for people who were interviewing. And I remember this one person, and I wasn't the hiring manager. I was supporting my close friend who was the hiring manager. And this person was pretty boastful in an interview, and I could tell, and it's not necessarily something that resonates with me. And he was talking about like how good he is and what he does and how he prepares for a meeting. And I said to him, okay, like, well, tell me a little bit more about how you prepare for a meeting. And he started telling me I do this, and I check on LinkedIn, and I check on this, and I look at people, and I'm like, okay, how did you prepare for this interview? And he was like, well, I looked at all of your LinkedIn profiles. And then like I knew the light bulb went off. The light bulb went off for me at that point in time. It didn't go off for him, which is because when someone checks on your LinkedIn profile. And I was like, okay, could I ask you, what did you learn about me? Now, that was in no way, shape, or form meant to like, stroke my ego and tell me what you learned about me. But it was like really getting 3 layers deep onto the questions. And there was silence in the room. Like everyone who was on this interview panel knew like this was over. But as a salesperson, it's like you need to know where some of these questions are coming from so that you can best prepare yourself for that. I felt bad for the result of that because I didn't feel like taking someone's legs out, but it was necessary at that time.
So Dave, I'm glad you brought that story up. I love that story. You told me that story years ago, and I've actually run with that. I've told that story so often that I've named it, and I think I've took credit for it. I can't even remember, but I call it the behavioral interviewing 1-2 punch. And again, we teach a lot of behavioral interviewing with our leadership teams. We've done so for the past 10 years. And again, I'm not trying to use it as a weapon, but with the whole thing about behavioral interviewing is tell me about a time when, right? Like give me some examples. So if preparation is important to the hiring manager and the person is talking about how they're great at preparation, well, give me an example. Oh, like how did you, so it's like the 1-2 punch. It's, so how did you prepare for this meeting? Boom, jab. Oh, I went on your LinkedIn profiles, blah, blah, blah. Oh, so what did you learn about me? Boom, that's the uppercut. Like if they can't answer that, they're done. They're done. They just hung themselves out to dry. So maybe that's having a little bit too much fun, but I'm glad you brought us down memory lane there. I got a question for you. Any regrets in your career? professionally speaking? Is there anything that you regret that you're open to sharing? And if not, that's totally fine.
I certainly do. I certainly do. I think there were probably times in my career where there were things I was challenged by and I was facing that were just obstacles at the moment, and that I avoided the obstacle by seeking new employment or seeking another opportunity. And some of the coaching that I've given some of my friends and colleagues, have been, are you running from an opportunity or are you running to an opportunity? And no matter what, we should focus on running to an opportunity, because if you're running from something, you better also be running to something. But if you're only running from something, there's a really good chance you're going to make a wrong decision. Now, by no means am I suggesting stay somewhere that isn't healthy for you or isn't the right place for you, but do whatever you can to find that place that is a good landing for you and that you're running to it and you're excited about it. And I think there were some circumstances in my career where I left something earlier than I should have, and I would have learned a lot more from it had I stayed there.
Sound advice. I actually thought you'd say something else. I thought you'd say don't order the meatloaf, but that your answer was much more powerful. So
you can never give up.
So, we'll talk about that, maybe on another episode. Leave everybody wondering. We'll leave that right there. Learned a ton, Dave. Really appreciate you sharing your lessons learned along the way. We talked about being coachable, being curious, being competitive, and running to something, not from something. So, Dave, if people want to reach out, if they liked what you talked about in terms of what 3Play Media does and they want to learn more, or they just have a follow-up question based on something you talked about, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Or if they want to know about that meatloaf comment, Matt. But
if they want to know about the meatloaf comment.
So it's probably easy. It's easiest through email. It's dphillips@3playmedia.com, or through LinkedIn. You can find me easily there. And I'd love to help out or chat with anyone in any way I possibly can.
Excellent. Dave, really appreciate you joining me today.
Thanks, Matt. Bye.
And thanks for everyone out there who's listening. Really appreciate you. And we really appreciate your feedback. If you've learned something today, if you've laughed a little bit, tell someone about the podcast, Coach2Scale. Go to YouTube, go to Spotify, wherever you consume your podcast. Hit the subscribe button, leave a comment. We do read them, we do respond, and we do act on them. Again, Dave, thanks a lot. It's been my pleasure to host this conversation on behalf of Coach2Scale. And until next time, coach them if you want to keep them. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, How Modern Leaders Build Coaching Cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at coachem.io. That's COACHEM.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachemNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.